You.
Good, good, good. Let me just do a little bit of preamble. Thanks for joining us today. Um, so I'm not going to do as long a preamble because we had James on a show, well, technically two-thirds of a show about a month ago, and we had some connectivity problems. So the end of the show got a little bit cut off. So rather than just make stuff up, I wanted to bring him on and kind of finish out the conversation. We were just getting into kind of the meat and bones of the finance of the Mars Society. So I'll post a link here in a minute to the original episode. It was about 5 weeks, 6 weeks ago. And I definitely want to encourage you to catch that because in that he gave his background, and it's pretty fascinating how James got to where he is, starting from the very first Mars Society conference to now. It's been a pretty wild ride. So definitely worth catching the first part of this episode. And of course, we'll cut it into a single episode when it goes to the podcast. But without going into a lot of preamble and history like we normally do, we're just going to jump straight into it. By way of introductions, I'm the president of Liftport Group. We've been doing space research focused on the moon for about 20 years. During the pandemic, we pivoted to doing a lot of conferences as a service and recently podcasts as a service as a way of just keeping the doors open, keeping the revenues going during the pandemic. And in the last few weeks, we've had some pretty cool conversations about pivoting back into doing lunar research, lunar infrastructure research. So we'll continue doing podcasts as a service and conferences as a service because it's important to us. But we also want to get back into working on lunar infrastructure. So keep your fingers crossed for that. We hopefully will have some news in probably the first week or so of February. I don't think it's going to happen in January. And with that, no more preamble. Let's bring James Burk back in and talk about the Mars Society. James, let's have you give just a brief overview to folks that are tuning in for the first time. And then we'll jump into kind of, the reason for the DareGreatly podcast is to talk about the money, the finances, the commercialization of space. And so, you have a role in that. We talked with Dr. Robert Zubrin last week and how he had a pretty outsized influence directly on Elon Musk, and that certainly has had some impacts throughout the whole space industry. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about the Mars Society. Give us a little bit of background. Hopefully, they will have gone to the other program.
Yeah, sure. So I'm with the Mars Society. We're the world's largest nonprofit organization that is focused on settling Mars and sending our human explorers to Mars. I'm the executive director of the Mars Society. I'm also a founding member, and I have been a volunteer for the last 25 years, up until about a year ago when I was hired on full-time to be our executive director.
Okay. Well, since that's the way you brought in your intro, let's talk about that. How did that happen that you became the executive director? There have been other executive directors, several that I can think of, but your role is different from all of theirs. So talk about the differences and then talk about how did that happen?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I've been a volunteer for 25 years, started out as the Seattle chapter lead organizer, and also helped out with a lot of the IT needs of the society for the last 25 years. About 10 years ago, I got hired on as a part-time webmaster, kind of as a paid staffer, but also had the title of director of information technology. So that was about 2012. And then as you mentioned, we've had a series of executive directors, like Susan Martin was the executive director back when I got brought on as webmaster and IT director. And we've had others, but they've always been volunteer, unpaid, and part-time, and really with a limited portfolio of things to do, things to manage. So what happened about a year ago, a little bit more than that, was Mars Society, we got a big donation from Blue Origin's Club for the Future, who gave $1 million to 19 different space-related nonprofits. And we were fortunate enough to be one of those 19. And so the board of the Mars Society and Robert Zubrin, our president and founder, decided that now's a good time to bring on a paid full-time executive director. And so we had many people apply for that. We had over 40 candidates and several finalists, and the board chose me, and I'm very thankful and grateful, and I'm just trying to do a good job with it, because it's an amazing opportunity for me and something that I really want to do. It's my dream job, basically. I used to work at Microsoft as a technical project manager, and did this as a fun thing on the side, as a volunteer thing. And now I'm actually doing it as my full-time job. So it's very kind of an amazing story and an amazing path I've been on, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, it has been really terrific. And I know you've worked at this for a long time. I've known you for about pretty close to 2 years now, and working pretty closely together for, call it, the last 18 months or so. And just to kind of see from the edges, the transition, your own growth, the growth of the organization, the shift, it's been pretty amazing. So congratulations to you and to the society, because I think it's a big, important step. Talk a little bit about the Club for the Future. What's it about? What's it for? And why did they give you and 18 other organizations, wheelbarrows full of money?
Well, the opportunity came up through their New Shepard space tourism flights, and there was a specific major donor, major customer of theirs that wanted them to give away the money. And so they decided, let's pick 19 nonprofits and give them each $1 million. And the theme of the selections was STEM education, because Club for the Future, which is Blue Origin's nonprofit arm, is focused on STEM education as its primary way to go after its mission of inspiring young people and inspiring people to be more participative in the space community, which is great, because that's also for the Mars Society. That's what we want to do as well. We want to inspire the generation that's going to settle Mars. So they basically, and I heard a little bit of the insider story as well from Michael Edmonds, who's the president of Club for the Future and spoke at our conference last October, just about 7 weeks ago now. He basically said, as they were deciding which nonprofits to give to, when they got to us, they were saying that they were meeting with Jeff Bezos and making the decisions. And he said, well, do we really want to give it to the Mars Society? I mean, usually we're not focused on Mars. Usually we're focused on the moon and Earth, orbiting space colonies, sort of the Freeman Dyson vision, the Gerard K. O'Neill vision of the future.
Yep.
And so no, Jeff said, nope, give the Mars Society one of these. They're part of the space community, and we don't want to discriminate, Right. So we're really thankful for that. And we just had our meeting of the 19 organizations. We meet, I guess, twice a year at this point. Right. Maybe it'll be more often next year, because it was a really good meeting we had last week. Each of the 19 organizations presented on what they had done for the last year related to the grant from Blue Origin, Club for the Future. And so when it was our turn, we actually got to go third out of the 19, which was cool, because the first meeting we were at, we were one of the last ones. So it was cool to get to go third.
Right.
And Robert talked about our high school engineering course and competition that we recently held last summer that was very successful. We had 40 students from around the world met over Zoom, and we gave them 2 weeks of lectures from a bunch of experts, folks that speak at our conference about Mars exploration. And then the students formed teams, and they actually designed a Mars mission together. And there were 5 teams, and they competed. They each presented, and then they criticized each other's presentations and designs, and then they had a chance to rebut the criticisms.
Right.
And they all turned in amazing work. Like, these are high school age students, and they turned in college level work.
Yeah.
And our judges were really impressed, and we were really impressed. We're actually going to publish a book of a lot of their designs, and a lot of them came to our conference at Arizona State.
Yeah. I met
and spoke. We had a panel about it. And so it's just been a very positive program. And so we talked about it with Club for the Future on that call, among the other amazing work that the other organizations were doing as well. I remember a lot of examples of, other organizations were doing really innovative things as well. For example, Planetary Society has a new program for younger kids called Planetary Academy. Okay. And we've spoken with them about it to see how we could help out promoting it. Cool. But essentially it'd be a kit to kind of get a young person involved in space and interested in it early on. And then they kind of stay with that student as they get older, which is a great, approach. And it fits in well with what I think we want to do long term with the Mars Society and our engineering program. So anyway, there's a lot going on with the education in the space community right now, in the nonprofit space community, and I think that's great.
Well, with 19 organizations, in fairness, $19 million going to space advocacy nonprofits. They were all nonprofits, right? You couldn't be a for-profit company to read that. Yeah. So
that's correct. It's 19, folks like the Challenger Center, and there's a couple of regional ones like the U.S. Rocket Center in Huntsville and the one in Houston. But a lot of other organizations that are like education and focus, like Teachers in Space, things like that. But also Planetary Society and National Space Society and Space Frontier Foundation and the Mars Society. Us four are the sort of space advocacy nonprofits.
Right. You guys have all been around for 30 plus years, 25 plus years. You've certainly proven your chops, proven your worth, had the test of time. Challenger Center came out of the Challenger crash. So that would have been 1987, 88, 87, I think. No, 85, 86.
That was 86, I believe. Also, SEDS and Space Generation Advisory Council are also part of Club for the Future. I think those are fantastic organizations that are great, like young talent pool developers for space, not just space companies, but nonprofits like us. We get a lot of people from SGAC come to our station, for example. And I've talked, every time we have a conference, we try to reach out to the local SEDS chapter and try to get them involved. And we did that with Arizona State this year. So those are great organizations too. Isn't
Bezos, wasn't he the chapter president for his SEDS group?
I believe so. Yeah.
I'm going to post a link to that. It's seds.org, right? It's got to be. So. It's Students for Exploration and Development of Space. I'll make sure I got that.
Yes.
I just posted it and they're like, well, maybe I just sent them to a random place. No, that's the right one. So this Club for the Future has really done, pretty remarkable things in just a really short time. Now you can do a lot if you commit $20 million, nearly $20 million to space advocacy. So really excited about that. And again, this program is about the money, finance, capitalization, and the intersection with space. So, when you have a philanthropic decision center like the Club for the Future, it can have an awful lot of leverage out into the world. So, good for them. good for the Mars Society, good for all the students that are impacted through all these programs. I've been a fan of Blue. I think people who know me know that while I admire SpaceX, Blue is actually my favorite rocket company. So just to see that kind of grow, it's pretty impressive. So did they have any plans for next year? You said maybe they're going to have quarterly meetings instead of biannual meetings, but did they say what they wanted out of the future?
Well, they would like us as part of the Club for the Future, the organizations that are participating that receive the grants. They'd like for us to see ways where we can work together.
Okay.
They also offered, Blue has 6,000 employees, and they repeatedly said, get our employees engaged with your nonprofits, reach out to them, which we're doing. There's a couple of folks that were even on the call that we are trying to reach out to and get involved with our programs and our plans for the next couple of years.
Cool.
So it's really exciting. It's a great group to be part of, I think, for us.
Well, of all the organizations you just listed, you're the only one that's 40 miles away from headquarters. So that maybe gives you a competitive advantage about getting Blue folks involved with your organization. So good. That's cool. Congrats. So that funding, it came in maybe it was 15 months ago or so, because it was enough time for you to join. You officially came on board the Mars site at the beginning of this year in January, right?
Yeah, it was August of last year.
Yeah.
I started in December. I started just about a year ago.
Okay. All right. So congrats on your anniversary. I'm guessing you had to report back to the Club for the Future, like what your successes were, but could you tell us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are the things that, this is how we spent the money and this is what we've accomplished?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, what we talked about on the call were two programs, the high school program I mentioned earlier, and there's a VR project that I've been working on for 5 years. And there's an aspect of that. We're going to do a field science demo using VR. And we talked about that. Those were just the two things we talked about on the call, because we only had 3 minutes, and they asked us, each organization, we prepared a single slide, and we're only able to highlight a couple things. There's a lot we do at the Mars Society. I was not able on either of the two calls with Club for the Future this year to talk about everything we do.
Right.
And the other thing to mention is we haven't spent all the money. Like we saved the majority of the money. We kind of see it as an endowment, as a cushion, so to speak, so that we can continue with our organization for several years if something happened where we weren't getting donations or incoming money coming in. So, but yeah, I mean,
that money is unspent currently. Most of that money is unspent.
I would say the majority of it is unspent. Now, there's two things that we have done. Number one is they hired me, so they've committed to bring me on. The second thing is we committed to help our Australian organization in the Mars Society of Australia to build their long planned station in Arkaroola, which is in southern Australia. And so we've pledged, haven't spent it yet, but we've pledged $200,000 for that project, assuming other funding comes in that is able to match that.
Okay.
So that's the one. Those are the two big actions we've taken.
Right.
So in general, I can kind of just get into our finances a little bit, because I know that was one of the topics you wanted to talk about.
I do. Hold that thought for a second. I just posted the Mars VR, but I don't have a link to the high school program, and I know that there's some teachers
It's on our main website under education.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. I'll try and get that posted here in a moment. Let's talk about the finances. Let's get into the numbers here, sir.
Sure. Yeah. So the Mars Society, we're normally an organization that has about a $200,000 to $300,000 a year operating budget. So that's kind of how much we spend per year. And COVID was a bit of a blip for us, just like a lot of other organizations. So I actually compare like what we do right now with a normal year, quote unquote, which I look at 2019. And in 2019, we had about 300,000 in spending, and roughly the same amount came in through donations, crew fees, grants, all the normal routes that we get funding. I should mention early on here that the Mars Society is a 100% private or publicly funded organization in terms of we're funded through donations from the general public. We don't get money from the government. We don't, in general, we don't get a lot of money from companies. We do get some, and this year we've gotten some corporate sponsorships with our conference. But in general, we're funded by just like John Q. Public sending us in a donation or buying a membership with the Mars Society or attending our conference.
Right.
So that's the majority of how we get our funding. And when I look at the last, 8 years of the Mars Society, the biggest year we ever had in terms of money coming in was 2016. And that's where we hit almost 500K in incoming donations and other revenue. But in general, we're about 200 to 300K at the moment, including this year.
And you're a spend what you get organization, right? So you add up the money, membership, donations, sponsorship, conference. Those are the bulk revenue elements. Mm-hmm. And you add it all up and you're like, well, here's how much we have. This is what we're going to spend. You're mostly a spend what you have.
We try to keep things flat. That's right. We do things on a shoestring budget in general. So, our station in Utah, we have run that for 20 years. And we keep it up and running. We fix things that are broken. We put a fresh coat of paint on it and new floors in it every couple of years. And we just did that this year. But in general, we're not like hiring a professional company to do that. We have volunteers come out and do most of that work. So it's free labor. And then we pay for the materials. We maybe pay for some other things like a new HVAC system or something like that. But we always try to get things donated to us,
right.
or in-kind contributions.
Because there were days when,
sorry. So like sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there were days in the early days where it was all, I'm going to say sweat equity. It was all donated time and money.
That's right. Both of our two stations, when they were built and early operations of them were 100% volunteer.
Amazing. Fantastic. Yeah. 25-year-old organization that's just been plugging away and keeping the fire burning. So good. That's great. So 200, 300,000 a year. Typically we had 1 year that was $500,000. Yeah, we all know that everybody took a hit in 2020. That's why we're doing this show in the first place, because that was our pivot.
And 21 wasn't that much better. Our donations went down a lot in 21. Yeah. But they've rebounded. So
okay. Oh, they have. Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So this year's been more like a normal year so far.
Okay. Good. So I know that you want to do some work in the Arctic Station. You want to do some work in the Australian outback.
Yes.
I was very
Mongolia too.
I was just about to mention Mongolia.
That's really there's a lot going on with that. We had a couple of meetings just today and last week about that. So
talk a little bit about that. Those are you've got kind of I'll say your crown jewels of Mars Desert Research Station, because that's been operating for so long and it's so important.
270 crews, over 1,500 crew members, 20 field seasons, huge body of research. Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah, that's the number one in the world.
That's definitely your crown jewels, and you should be especially proud of that. But now you've got 3 other sites. Flashline's been around, but it's seen better days. It's been effectively unused for many years. It's going to need some pretty serious TLC to bring it back online.
That's what we're planning right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, we haven't been up there for 5 years. Flashline is up in the Arctic Circle in Canada on Devon Island. And that was our first station. We decided to build that in '99 and built it in 2000. First crew was in 2000. But that's a lot harder to get to, and so we usually only mount like one expedition there every couple years, and it's usually just one crew. So obviously MDRS is a much better, station for what we're trying to do overall, but certainly Flashline is interesting in a lot of ways. And right now we are planning an expedition. We just announced that it's going to go next summer, and we're actively looking for crew members. It's about $100,000 expedition. So each crew member would need to bring about 20,000 for the mission, as part of being part of the crew. And yeah, we do need to retrofit the station a bit, make sure it's ready for habitability and safe. But we're very excited about that mission, and we're actively planning it right now.
Terry Javino just posted to chat, let's figure that out. F Mars, exclamation point. So thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. Glad you're watching.
And we do have some opportunities for funding as well, for companies that are interested. We are going to sell the naming rights to Flashline, because the name Flashline is actually a .com that we sold the naming rights to 20 years ago.
Right.
That contract has run out and then some. So we are going to sell the naming rights, and the price right now is $2 million for a 10-year deal. And we're actively talking to companies about that. We also are looking for corporate sponsorships. You can have a company put their logo on the HAB or some other packages that we have available. So we're actively looking for, raising money in that way as well for both Flashline and the MDRS.
So it's 100,000 for Flashline mission. Is that per year, do you think?
Yeah, it's just for one mission to rent the Twin Otters and to get the crew up there and the supplies they need. It's about 100 to 120 is what we estimate right now. Okay. A Twin Otter is a small cargo type airplane that we can fly from Resolute, which is the closest place you can get to that is on normal air routes.
So anybody that wants to do that, they got to fundraise for some cash. We've had a whole set of episodes. I think we had like 5 hours of programming 6 months ago on what it takes to be an analog astronaut. So I want to recommend anybody that's interested in being an analog astronaut, definitely check out the show that the Mars Society was participating in for our Better Futures channel. What's it take to get, you said 200,000 for Australia to come online. What's it take?
That's our pledge. Our pledge is essentially matching funds for the rest of what they need to bring that station online. That's a major project. That's going to be a station that has a different design than FMARS and MDRS. It's a kind of a space station module on its side, like a landed kind of spacecraft that landed on its side,
right,
instead of a 2-story habitat. So and then the fact that where it is, it's pretty remote as well in Arkarula. So that's a larger project, I think, than any of the ones we've done before.
Well, then let's talk about Mongolia, because that is, I think, I'm going to tell the audience. So I was at the Mars Society conference in Arizona, as James has said, maybe 7 weeks ago. I don't know, there's probably 350 people in the banquet hall. It's kind of the closing night. I'd been hearing about the Mongolians for a couple of days now, but I was running around like a crazy person trying to keep all the other videos going. So I hadn't really been paying attention. So there I am, kind of in the front row, one of the front row banquet tables, and they start talking about Mongolia, and I admit I was pretty skeptical. and it blew my mind. So I was so impressed. I was one of the first people on my feet with a standing ovation. I thought they earned it. They're doing amazing work. I hope that they can fulfill their mission. So let's talk about what the Mongolians are doing, because I bet you most people on this call don't know what that is. And then let's talk about the money, because this is a money program.
Yeah, so the Mongolian organization that was presenting at our conference, they're called Mars V. I just put the URL in the chat for you, Michael.
Thank you.
They are an organization in Mongolia that has support at the highest level from their government, and they are essentially a Mars Society type organization. They're now our official chapter in Mongolia, and they have several thousand members, and they're working on an analog research program there in Mongolia. They have the advantage of the Gobi Desert is a great Mars analog, and there's a lot of areas in the Gobi that we could practice exploring Mars. And they're very excited and very interested as a society in Mars. Mongolia is landlocked between Russia and China, and they have a cultural history of the nomadic society, the warrior culture from ancient times, and that, a lot of that carries through to the way the modern Mongolians are. They're very independent people. They're very competent, and they're very dedicated and hardworking people. And I've been extremely impressed, just like you, Michael. I've been extremely impressed every interaction I've had with them. Robert was invited by them to come out and visit earlier this year and scout out locations for an analog station in the Gobi Desert. And so he did, and he came out to Mongolia, and he was treated like a celebrity. And there's a great video that we watched at the conference about his trip to Mongolia, where he met with the senior federal agencies over there, the education ministry and the economic ministry and the prime minister. And they also took him out to an opera that they were performing that was about Mars. There's actually a famous poet in Mongolia that about 100 years ago he was 25 years old, and he wrote a poem about Mars. It's called Dreams of Mars. And it's a very culturally significant poem for them. And so one of the things that they're going to do this coming year, in addition to having the first mission at their new analog station, is to create a monument to the poem called Dreams of Mars. And it's really cool. And we're going to be part of that monument's dedication. But they're essentially planning a nomadic Mars analog station that you could pack up and move to a different location in the Gobi. It's the same size as one of our other stations. It's going to be it's not a 2-story building. It's 2 yurts, or they call them gars, next to each other. Mm-hmm. But they're very futuristic looking. They're working on the designs right now, and they've got solar panels, as well as having the ability to just go inside and use them for the crew quarters and for laboratory space. They've talked about also having a greenhouse component to it as well. But the idea is you pack all that up and move it to a different location and be able to explore a large area of the Gobi that way. And so we're working with them to plan the first mission, which will be next May. And we're planning to help with the crew selection, as well as the science program that's happening for that.
What does it cost to do something like that? So we've got some orders of magnitude, 100,000 per mission at up in the Arctic, 200,000, but that's only a portion of a matching grant to build an entirely new site down in Australia. What are the obligations for and expectations for Mongolia?
Yeah, I mean, they are self-funding it, and so it's not the same as building like the MDRS campus. If we had to build the MDRS campus from zero, I think it'd probably be around $400K or so to build that, and so it's not that much. I'd say it's probably 100 to 200K, but they're getting a lot of that in kind from people that are just interested in this, and they have suppliers, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of people in that country that just are part of this effort even before they talk to us, and they have a lot of support. So
let's talk numbers for a second. So they were talking about 3,000 members in their organization. Mm-hmm. You have, call it 8,000 to 12,000 people kind of in your spheres, in your networks. I don't think that's what your membership numbers are.
No, we have 90,000 followers on social media. We have about 30,000 in our email bulletin, which is high traffic. And we have, in terms of paid members, under 2,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if there's a much larger community that's part of the Mars Society. Yeah. Than just our paid members.
Here's an aside. I've been involved around the edge of the Mars Society for 20 years. It was the very first conference I ever went to. But I only became an actual member a few weeks ago, right? So there's people like me that are supportive and interested and I would say Mars adjacent. So I know that we've talked about that being a priority to kind of raise your membership numbers, but here you've got Mongolia with a really unexpected number of 3,000 people in their environment. 90,000 in the Mars Society social media network. That actually makes a lot of sense. I know your YouTube channel's 25,000. I know that one by heart, but it is kind of amazing to have your level of influence, Zubrin's level of influence, and seeing the ripple effects of 25 years of just constantly pushing the same thing. It's really quite cool. So without your leadership, past executives leadership, Zubrin throwing a big rock in the pond and having all those ripples come out, the Mongolians and the Australians wouldn't have probably any program at all, but now there's this global unified effort. So that's got to be right. That's got to be.
And we also have partners in Europe, the Space Renaissance initiative, as well as our Poland chapter. There's 2 analogs in Poland. There's one in Iceland. There's the Amadi program that's going to be in the Negev Desert, I believe, next, which we've had members part of. Our French chapter is huge. Over 300 people in our French chapter. There's many people from ESA as well in the French chapter. And then over in Asia, like we have a Chinese chapter and an Indian chapter that are very large. Lots of support there. And then across Asia as well. I mean, there's like Singapore and Philippines. One of our students was from the Philippines for the high school program. And so, and we're hoping for big things from him in the future. Awesome. But we have pretty broad support internationally. It's great to be part of the Mars Society because we're kind of a globally minded organization, very diverse.
Yeah. Doug Plata is going to be our guest on Wednesday this week, and he's got a comment from the chat here. Flashline shows that distance makes a big difference. Arkaruli is 5 hours from the closest home hardware store. Why not have an analog base near a Home Depot with local volunteer population and a large university? Now, I know that, Doug, if you don't know Terry Trevino, you all should exchange contact information. Terry was at the analog site in North Dakota just a few months ago, and that is actually pretty close, and that's on a university campus. So there's at least that one, but I'm going to put words in James and Zubrin's mouth here. What they are trying to do as an analog site is replicate the remoteness, the geography. Zubrin told us a good story about finding dinosaur bones out there.
In a place where a rover never could. Yes.
Right, in a place where rovers never could. Very important detail from Zubrin. So I'm going to let James answer that, but my answer is talk to Terry Trevino. There's things you can do on a local campus that are great, and there's things that you can't do unless you're out in the wilderness somewhere.
Yeah, the short answer, Doug, is that's not what we would have on Mars, right? The other point, not all analog programs around the world by us and others have the same goals. What we try to do at the Mars Society, and you can take a look at this book that Robert wrote called Mars on Earth, which is a little known book. It's about how the Flashline station was built, but also why we do this. We're trying to show the human factors challenges of working on Mars and how you would explore a large area with a human crew. I mean, Robert is a little anti the Mars 500 experiment, for example, like having a crew isolate and not do anything. That's not really what we believe is gonna happen with humans on Mars. We believe that the first crew that goes to Mars is going to explore a large area for science reasons. And so that's kind of what we practice. We try to set up our analog bases so that we can practice exploring as well as being in an isolated environment and the challenges that go with that. The challenges of human beings working together in an isolated environment. One of the things I've noticed is we have a lot of crews that know each other, that work together. Maybe they all are from the same university and they apply together and they're friends and colleagues. And then they get out to Utah and, the gloves come off, people get a little dehydrated and they're time crunched and maybe things aren't going according to plan. And that's the real test of working together on Mars. When you're on Mars, you're going to have people's lives in your hands. How do you respond to that? And so, one of the reasons why we have our stations in isolated environments is because we can simulate that a little bit. We can go out to the Utah desert where, there's not a ton of cell phone signal and we have to truck our water in, and you have to kind of plan ahead of what you need while you're there because there's no Walmart 5 minutes away. The closest Walmart is 2 hours away. So, it's not life-threatening to be there, but, if you have a broken arm, if you twist your ankle, you're gonna need some help out there.
There have been medical emergencies. There's been some at high seas. There's been some at MDRS, and there's been some at Biosphere, right? Those are just the ones I know of, right? So that being able to kind of react in a remote environment and having the skills to do something is pretty important. I do think there's value. I'm out here in the Seattle region, so is James. I would love for University of Washington to build an analog site. I don't think that's on anybody's to-do list right now. But I think there's value in having, a big university side by side to a program. But I know that that's not what you're aiming for. And you've had the Mars Society has had other opportunities to do exactly that. That's not the data that they're trying to capture.
It's just not the approach we're taking. Ours is more on a shoestring than having a university run it. No, I definitely want to give a shout out to Biosphere 2 and Chi-Stats and the SAM. That's a really innovative new analog that he's setting up in the prototype Biosphere environment that they built initially, the small version that then they later scaled up to be the large facility we all know of. He's essentially repurposing that small building to be a Mars analog, a Moon and Mars analog. And it is part of the University of Arizona, and it is going to have broad support, from the university community there. And I think that's great. And it's just different than what we do at the MDRS.
And it's only 40 miles from town, but it's way out there. I mean, there's a town that's, I think, 8,000
Yeah,
people.
Oracle is pretty close. We didn't go. You and I,
Yeah.
when we were there in October, we didn't go to Oracle, but I think
Yep.
that's a nice,
But
decent sized town.
there's a
Pretty close
small
by.
town of like 8,000 people that's nearby, but the closest big town that would have a
Phoenix.
yeah. I mean, they're still a ways out there. So, all right. So let's kind of get back to the money, the finances. We've got about 15 minutes left. If you wanna wrap this up, but what does 2023 look like? What is the budgeting process? Assuming you said that this year was kind of a little bit more closer to normal, 200,000 to 300,000. You're going to get some more donations, maybe increase the size of the membership, so that's some new potential revenue. You've got sponsorship. You've got the income from the endowment, where most of the Club for the Future capital is held. So, what is a budget when you decide? Okay, let's figure out what we're going to spend it on. What does that look like? Like how does that budgetary process happen? And then let's talk about like the big line items.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly still in the process of setting up a lot of those processes. It's my first year as executive director. There's a lot of things we weren't really doing as an organization before I came on. And so in general, what I'm trying to do is get us to program level budgets. Like any nonprofit will have an annual report, and it'll have, in a general sense, what their operating revenue is and their operating expenses are. And they usually divide those into programs. So they can, say, okay, we have this education area. We're going to go after this many students a year, and we spend this much on it. So you can kind of scale and say, oh, well, if we spend $100 per student and we're reaching 500 students, if you give us more money, we could reach more students,
Right.
So I'd love to have like that as an offering for the Blue Origins of the world, of like, give us $50,000 and we can reach this many more students per year with our high school program, for example. So having that understanding is what we're trying to get to. If I look at what our big initiatives are coming up, we are trying to raise money for the education programs. That's primarily going to be done through corporate sponsors. We are also going to do a crowdfunding campaign for the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. That's analogous to the one I ran for Mars VR a couple years ago. And so I've run 2 crowdfunding campaigns for the Mars Society, both for Mars VR. The first one was in 2018. We raised $31,000, and the last one was in 2021, and we raised $109,000. And so, using that same methodology, I'm going to try to raise money for the MDRS by having the general public purchase small pledges, reward levels, things like a model of the MDRS. We have a Friends of MDRS package we're going to talk about, where you can get your name on a plaque there, and some other things, and selling T-shirts and stickers and things like that. And then we will have some larger packages for major donors as well as part of that campaign. So we're going to come out with that and hopefully raise 100,000 to 200,000 with that. And that'll be in the first quarter of next year. We're also planning to do that Arctic mission in the summer. And so we're going to raise money to do that. We're hopefully going to raise enough money to do that mission so that there's no net expenses to the Mars Society. We raise the funds to run the mission.
Right.
So in general, what I'm trying to get us to is, if we know we want to do something, that we have a budget for it, and then we go fundraise against that budget before we actually do the thing.
Right.
At the end of the year, we're positive, or we're zero, we're flat. We're not, in the red, putting on our programs. And so, so the biggest programs we have right now are the MDRS and the Arctic mission, and then it's what we're doing with education. We also have other programs, like we have the Mars Society Ambassador program, which is a cadre of people that can represent us and talk to us in their communities and public speak about humans to Mars. we run that program on a very shoestring budget, basically just volunteer coordination and a little bit of funds to give them stickers and outreach materials.
Right.
But that's not going to be a huge hit to our working capital next year.
Right. Okay. So assuming you're able to raise for these kind of new initiatives, if I'm keeping my math kind of clear, that might be a $500,000 to $600,000 budget, maybe even $7,000 if you've got the. You're normally at $200,000 to $300,000, so starting there, and then you're going to bring in $100,000 for Flashline, and then another $100,000 to $200,000 on the crowdfunding. So that gets you pretty close to $500,000 or $600,000 there, and then there's other stuff. Is that right? Am I doing my math?
There's a little overlap there. I'd say when we have a normal quote unquote normal year, like I was talking about earlier, where it's 200 to 300,000 of spending, as well as donation, grants, crew fees. That's a mix of things. The largest piece of that pie are the individual donations.
Okay.
And so,
are they from
the
individual
campaign is designed to get a little bit more than average of those this coming year, and to direct those into MDRS. Okay. We will still have our normal set of crew rotations at the station for the next field season, and we'll have a little bit. We had a little bit of improvement budget this year for MDRS. We'll have a little bit next year as well, but that'll be sort of a normal year overall for MDRS.
Okay.
Of 2,000 to 3,000 of like $200K, I'd say. Then Flashline's on top of that, and again, that's going to be new money that comes in that we spend to do Flashline. We're not going to dip into our endowment to do Flashline. Right. Nope. We'd already decided not to do that last year. So it's got to be new money that comes in to do Flashline, and then new money that comes in to scale up our education program as well. The high school program we did this past year, we ran on our own. There was really no costs. Right. And we really didn't ask for anything other than a $50 registration fee for the students. And we never did any fundraising for it. It was just basically a pilot program that we did on our own. I was the coordinator. So next year when we scale it up, we'll be bringing on some volunteers, maybe some paid staff to help run that program and scale it up commensurate with the funding we're able to get. We're also actually for that program talking about not just doing it online in the summer, but doing it at a brick and mortar institution in the spring, possibly more than one. So that's also where some funding would go, is helping facilitate and make sure those programs ran successfully.
I know that there's some high school robotics teachers that have been paying attention to our show for a little while, and I'm sure I'm going to get some phone calls about that pretty soon.
We're talking about high school robotics, like Mars rover kits and things like that, and then how if we do get some money for STEM education as new grants for us, that we may put some of that into doing high school rover kits and field trip in a box type kits that we could then distribute at cost, or maybe for free, maybe sponsored to different educational institutions.
Awesome. I'm going to go and ask you to pull out your crystal ball. Doug has asked a question that I'm pretty sure you can't actually answer correctly, but let's play some games here.
Sure.
How do you think Mars will be paid for? What I'm really assuming is how I'm going to kind of put some clarity on your question, Doug. Hopefully I'm right. How do we get to Mars? How do we get people to Mars? And where's the budget for that going to come from? I'm going to make some assumptions that SpaceX is pretty deeply involved with that, but not the whole story. But where do you think, let's put some time frames and some budgets on there. What's it take to put a crewed mission onto the Martian surface?
Yeah, I mean, SpaceX certainly is in the lead right now on doing this. And that's what their whole Starship initiative is organized to be, is a human Mars program that's private. Now they get the majority of their funds historically from the Falcon 9 development was from the U.S. government.
Yep.
Now they are selling rides on the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy, and they will be selling rides on Starship, and they are selling rides on Starship like Deer Moon. They pre-sold, even though Starship's not operational yet. So some of that is coming from private sources, but the vast majority of SpaceX is funded by the U.S. taxpayer. And that's been the case. And so when on the surface, to answer Doug's question, we're going to get to Mars on the backs of government funding, I think, primarily. But there's an important role for the private sector to play, because the private sector right now is the one that's developing the technology that's far ahead of the SLS, that is the government program to go back to the moon, and possibly go to Mars. With an advanced upper stage. You could do a Mars mission, a human Mars mission with SLS if you have a upper stage that could lift and throw to Mars. And that's like what Robert talked about in his book, in the 90s, was essentially an SLS type rocket. He called it the Ares, but it was a shuttle derived design that he worked on at Martin Marietta in the 80s. And so it's funny when we see SLS, when he talks about seeing SLS fly, he's like, yeah, I designed that in the 80s. There's nothing like new or innovative about that rocket.
Well, the NASA administrator on Sunday after the Artemis splashdown, kind of point blank said, the Obama administration tasked us to get there by 2033. We're not going to hit that. We're looking at the end of the 30s. The end of the 30s.
With SLS, you're saying?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, we can go really deep on what NASA's plans are for Artemis. I don't think they're really just to finish answering Doug, though. Like, it's going to be the private sector driving the mission. We're not. If it is SpaceX, if Starship is the way that we get to Mars, then it will have been a private mission, a private product that's been designed specifically for Mars, without a government mandate. Yeah. But the funding ultimately will come from the government, because that's who's that's the majority of where SpaceX gets their funding now.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting watching the money move around at SpaceX. Musk isn't putting his own personal cash into it, and hasn't been for a long time. They've got another capital raise happening now that's in the $1.5 billion range on a $110 billion valuation, and that's private capital, right? So they're getting
Starlink also. The whole reason they designed the Starlink system was to fund a Mars mission,
and they just
to have revenue coming in to fund a Mars mission.
They just added in the Star Shield version, which is the military grade version of Starlink.
Right.
They've got 500,000 subscribers. The commercial side, the civilian side, has 500,000 subscribers. That's a pretty good cash cow, right? That's a pretty good cash cow. So Doug, to kind of answer your question, there's going to be federal funds coming in for R&D, primarily for the moon. There's going to be private capital coming in to fund other R&D. And then there's revenues from launch, whether that's Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, or Starship. And then there's revenues from Starlink. So there's a lot, and that's just one company. Let's really be clear, right? Because the United Arab Emirates have an entirely different government-funded program. And just 2-3 weeks ago, Korea announced that they're going to Mars. So there are nationalistic plans that are far more, I would say, more ambitious, maybe or maybe not more capable. I'm a little skeptical, but certainly more ambitious than the NASA plan currently. So,
and look, the U.S. is not asleep anymore at going to Mars. I mean, I was just watching CNN last night where they were talking about the Orion capsule splashed down, and Mars came up as we're eventually going to Mars. Like the anchor, the CNN anchor was just like, "Oh yeah, of course, we're eventually going to Mars with this."
Right.
And for me, it's like that's great. They didn't used to talk that way.
Right.
Even a couple years ago, it was like, no, we're going to the moon, not Mars. Right. So I think, I definitely think that the U.S. is on a path to go to Mars, whether or not SpaceX is the way we get there. It just still take longer, quite frankly.
Yeah. All right, sir. With that, it is straight up at 6 o'clock. I'm going to close out this program. Terry and Doug, thanks for your feedback. We always appreciate y'all in the chat. I appreciate my team doing a great job keeping things flowing here. And with that, we're going to close out. Thanks a lot, James, for being patient and coming back a second time. We really appreciate it. It's very enlightening.
Always a pleasure, Michael.
Roger. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.